Well, welcome everyone to Working Title, an interview series part two, featuring Jen, aka
Hello.
Sveta from the hit podcast Reflex Save. I'm Tim, and I will be interviewing her. Jen, how are you?
I'm doing very well this evening. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Good.
So let's get straight into it, I suppose.
You're not going to work on that
Um,
working title and actually give it a title?
that's the work. That's the title.
Okay.
It's called Working Title. That's the joke.
It's very funny.
Anyway, so while most people know you from the hit podcast Reflex Save as the voice of Sveta, everyone's favorite Russian cat girl, I wanted to start by talking about the person behind the fur. So tell us a little bit about Jen. I mean, whatever you're comfortable revealing to the internet, of course, like your background, what do you like doing when you're not playing tabletop RPGs? Anything you'd like to share?
Person behind the fur. So I am originally from Victoria in Australia, and I have a Canadian mother, which you will be able to detect some form of faux accent when I talk. And I spent a year in Canada trying to develop it. And I bounced around state to state, from Victoria to Queensland, back to Victoria, back to Queensland. And that's because my father is a builder, so he wanted to test out every single home that he built. That's well over 20 houses.
That's admirable, but exhausting, yeah.
Yep. So I think that's why I gravitated towards Sveta as a cat, because I just lived in a box half my life. So
Right, okay.
it kind of grew on me a bit. Other than that, I think outside the podcast and playing D&D, I've really gravitated towards also drawing a lot. And this podcast has really inspired me to pick up the pen again and draw you guys and draw just a bunch of stuff on the internet that I found interesting thanks to D&D, because, I mean, it's the best kind of fantasy out there that I can grab inspiration from.
Absolutely. And you are not short on talent in the art department, I will tell you that.
Thank you very much.
So what was the last video game you played?
Oh, last one I played is actually, as recording, is Baldur's Gate 3.
Ah, me too.
It's been so much fun. I've actually neglected a whole bunch of things because just driving on through it.
So as a D&D player, how do you rate Baldur's Gate 3? Do you think they've struck a good balance in terms of making it a video game that's based on D&D?
I think so. I've actually think they've improved upon what D&D is supposed to be. And I was talking to Callan about it too. I think the way that they've made magic items, and Larian Studios has always been really good with making magic items for their video games, but they've even made magic items that accommodate monks, which I think in D&D there's maybe 4 items in total, and that's through all the books. And wow. Larian has come in and just given them a whole host of things to use for their characters, and how they've visualized also spells, especially Eldritch Blast, is just been incredible.
It is a very cool effect. Can confirm.
Yeah. You're also playing a warlock?
No, I'm playing a storm sorcerer, actually.
Nice.
I actually, without, I won't get into it too much, but yeah, I took my own character creation philosophy and came up with some kind of lightning mage that I wanted to be. So I did.
Very cool.
So you just mentioned then that, getting into the podcast has gotten you back into art and drawing, and it is no secret that you are very talented. And I'm sure anyone who is listening or follows us on social media could confirm that. Tell us how you got into art and what are your favorite things to draw?
I first got into art as you do in high school and testing out just different visual mediums, and then I actually had a bit of a head injury that caused me to not be able to visualize anything anymore, and I found that incredibly frustrating to not be able to really vocalize how I feel. So drawing it instead, because I can't see it, is a really great outlet for me. And I really enjoy drawing like just fantastical things because realism's not really my jam. Like I see things all the time. I don't really want to draw that too. So
I see enough and living.
Yeah. I'm looking at possums. I don't want to draw a possum. I want to draw dragons. I want to draw like mechas. And I especially like challenging myself. So actually drawing like a cat. Well, I know that's something that's based in realism, but for me, drawing cats is like the ultimate challenge because they're really hard to draw.
Right. What is it about a cat that's hard to draw?
I think it's the proportions in their head. I make their heads way too big.
Right.
It's a little like something that's really inconsequential to the actual overall picture, but it bothers me a lot.
Okay. Well, I mean, you've got 2 little case studies running around at home all the time. Do you use them as examples?
I use Raz a lot. Nix isn't very photogenic, so I just use Raz.
Yes, I imagine if Raz was a person, he would love people making portraits of him.
Yeah, he and Andrew as Woden as a character definitely would get along.
They would spend their whole lives talking about how good each other look.
Exactly.
So one other thing that many people probably wouldn't know about you is that you have an amazing and growing collection of tattoos. Give us an overview, and which one is your favorite?
I do. I rarely show myself on socials, but I'm very proud of my collection, except for a few. But my arm is a tapestry of all the countries I've been to so far, which is always going to be growing. And I have a raven from Canada. I try not to go for like the actual birds that you would normally associate to those countries. It's birds that I really like. So for Australia, I've got the boobook owl. For Thailand, I've got the yellow tit. For Taiwan, I've got a nightjar. And I have the red bauble for Hong Kong. And then my last, but my favorite one is the rifleman, which is from New Zealand. And they all have the country flowers that they're from too. So I don't forget where they're from.
That's amazing. So does that mean that you've been to all of these countries, or at least spent an extended period in all of them?
Yeah, the cheat one's kind of Taiwan. I only did a 2-day layover there, but we did go into the city and I got my foot run over by a scooter. So I feel that that's made me really connected to that country.
Literally.
Yeah.
You squished into it.
Yeah, it's just like, oh, part of my footprint's a bit engraved on the pavement. So I feel like I should put that on my body somewhere.
That's amazing.
And then I've just got some bees that symbolize my granny, who did pass away, but she just really liked bees, and I like bees too. So I thought that might just add a few of those on there too.
Oh, that's really sweet.
Yeah, but definitely my favorite's the Canadian raven, because its beak is piercing onto a D20, which you could tell I like D&D.
Nice.
So,
Great. So what are you getting next? Because I know that people who get tattoos, there's no such thing as a last tattoo. So what's next?
Last one, it's actually a goal, and I want to tone my arms up a bit, but I do want to get, and it's thanks to the podcast, I really want to get a cardinal for America.
Okay.
Just because the meat birds are cardinals in my,
of course,
in my descriptions. And yeah, and then I'll probably work on my leg next, which I want to actually do a bunch of Lovecraftian monsters, but that's a further down the track thing. That's a few $1,000s I have to save up.
Right, but that's still pretty sick.
Yeah,
Lovecraftian legs.
I'm so excited. I'm just going to get like a bunch of eyeballs and tentacles everywhere. It's going to be great.
Amazing. Well, without spoiling the podcast, of course, it is safe to say that Sveta has had a paranormal experience. What's your opinion on the paranormal? Just a hard swing there for you.
Hard swing, but I appreciate it. I don't personally believe in the paranormal. I would love to, but it's incredibly far-fetched. And also the implication behind just ghosts being everywhere is a bit worrisome. I don't want anyone to watch me when I'm in the toilet, and that's where I assume all of them will just be in the afterlife.
It's congregating the loos.
Just hanging out. What, do you believe in ghosts?
I don't. But I do think there is things out there that we're unable to perceive, and our brains need closure. So I feel like they come up with things, and I personally think that's the basis of the paranormal.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
It's certainly a different way to look at it, like trying to find reasoning behind stuff that can't be explained. And I get that, but there's always logic behind it, I know. And I just don't want to play into like the fantastical side of the paranormal because it doesn't feel right. I want logics and facts.
Absolutely. So you consider yourself a very logical and fact-based person?
Yeah. As much as I would love to believe the Loch Ness Monster and ghosts and ghouls and stuff like that. I'll certainly draw them, I can tell you.
Right. So another hard turn. So despite being a cast member of award-winning D&D podcast Reflex Save, are there any other tabletop RPG podcasts that you listen to and can recommend?
Yeah, so from top of my head, I can think of 3, which would be Roll Britannia. It would also be Rainbow Dice Club and Big Campaign Podcast. They've all been wonderful to listen to. I really love the energy of all 3 of those. There's so many more, and I have no doubt like people are screaming at me of like, oh, why didn't this podcast or Critical Role? And like I've never listened to Critical Role. It's too long. It would also be Dice and Desire as well. That's a wonderful podcast too. I've really enjoyed them.
I see. So what do you look for in a good TTRPG podcast? I mean, be it actual player interview, are there things that draw you to particular types?
I think having that kind, and that's what really I like about our podcast, not to toot our own horn, but just a bunch of people, a bunch of mates sitting around a table and just having a good time, just role playing as they would, nothing scripted, just raw role playing experience. Like no one has to be the best actor in the whole world. Everyone's just having a laugh. And I actually got that experience listening to Billowing Hilltop podcast. They just felt like a bunch of really good mates that have known each other for like 30 plus years, all sitting around a table and just enjoying themselves. And you felt warmed and welcomed listening to that. And that's what I really look for.
Right. So good chemistry. I guess that might be a reason why everyone has their own favorites, because, you know, everyone's different, I suppose. And you look for a group that you kind of would fit into naturally yourself, I think, because that means, you know, you feel like you're a part of it. So, yeah.
Like you really want to be, like, you want to be included in that table. You're like, oh, man. Like, not even the DM. Like, the DM's a big thing of, like, listening to a podcast. But it's also, like, how's everyone else's energy around the table? It's like, would I get along with those people too? And you listen to them, you're like, yes, I would absolutely get along with everyone at this table. I want to be seated there listening in on that fun.
And, you know, and then you start forming parasocial relationships.
Yeah.
And then before you know it, you're in Sam Riegel's DMs. Anyway, that's another topic to talk about. So now I'm going to move to a section that Andrew pioneered with me, and I thought it was great. So I'm going to hit you with it.
Sure.
It's a series of quick fire questions. Now, I don't want you to think about it. I just want your knee-jerk reaction. And let's jump into it. Are you ready?
Ready. Yep.
All right, here we go. Fire or ice?
Ice.
Arms or legs?
Legs.
Permission or forgiveness?
Forgiveness.
Sun or moon?
Moon.
Meaning of life?
Meaningless.
Ooh, what a bombshell to finish on. Thank you. I will remember those answers. Okay, so now I want to talk a bit more about the nuts and bolts, right? The nitty gritty. So let's talk a bit about D&D.
Yeah.
how did you first get into tabletop RPGs? Was it D&D?
It was indeed. I have Callan to thank for that. I had no idea D&D was a thing. I didn't know tabletop RPG was a thing. I grew up on Scrabble, and card games.
The classics.
The classics, and Mousetrap. So knowing that there was
Yep.
different board games out there and people just doing theater of the mind games was really weird and different. But Callan got me into it straight when 5th edition came out, because he tried to get me into 3.5 with an existing group that he was playing in. And I didn't understand it. I was like, nope, this is too complicated. I don't want to touch that. You've got 7 books out on the table and none of them are opened and I'm scared. So he let me be and he just played with his mates for the time. And then when 5th edition came out, I think 2014, don't quote me on that. He's like, we're going to go over to Dave's place, which is another mate of ours. He sat us down. We all got our books together. Oh, I think actually Martin and Rachel were there too. And yeah, he introduced me to 5th edition. We all learnt together and I had a lot of fun. Didn't know what I was doing. And I'm pretty sure we read the poison rule wrong, because I think we stacked poison damage just on top of these poor goblins. So I felt bad for them.
That would be devastating.
Yeah. We just blitzed through this whole campaign because I'm pretty sure we just read the rules wrong. But yeah, he got me into the 5th edition. Cool. And then, yeah, he bought my first dice set and I thought that was very sweet. And wasn't really convinced that I would buy more dice after that, but I'm very much wrong in that respect.
Definitely showed him.
Yeah.
Yeah, Callan got me into it as well, actually. I think he's got a lot of people into D&D.
He's very excited. He was very insistent on Andrew playing with him, and Andrew was saying, oh, I've got my mate Tim, can he come along? I'm like, all right. Yeah, so you've fallen into his trap too.
I have. I've got him to thank, and also Andrew to thank for getting into this whole thing. Let's talk about Sveta. So what was the creative process behind making Sveta as a character, and did this process differ from your normal character creation methods?
So I listened to your interview behind how you created Horatio, and I wouldn't say it's too far off of your method. But I usually think of an idea of what I want to do. So usually a concept of personality, and then kind of mold the character from there. So I wanted to play for the podcast something safe, because I really wasn't sure of being very socially awkward. I wasn't really wanting to fumble over learning new rules and new things for a class. So I chose my favorite one as Druid. And then from there, I brought out the personality that I wanted to emulate, which was from an old comedy show called Fast Forward, which there was a segment on there called Good Morning Moscow. And Svetlana is one of the co-hosts that's on that show. And she was very short, pig-headed, but also very awkward. And she had that silly Eastern Bloc accent. It's definitely not a real accent, but I took that, and I know I wanted to play something that was not really sure of herself, but then wanting to grow as a person. And the shifter side of that was just, I'd never seen a shifter before, and that seemed pretty cool. It also really played, it's not really oh, there's a special meaning behind being a shifter. It's no, that seems pretty awesome. Aware person, count me in, I'm going to play that. And also because it wasn't too fantastical, you can kind of get away with being that and also just being in civilization, whereas I think being a kobold like Carnelian is a bit harder to for me at least, to find an excuse as to why I would want to be a monster race over just a normal classic race.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, obviously you can be whatever you want, but and especially in such a restricted campaign like Icewind Dale, you really gotta have a good excuse for a kobold being there.
Yeah, and even
interesting.
In Asimir, Andrew had such an awesome backstory to justify that, and just trying to find those reasonings and those little story points to justify your race, I think is a really fun aspect of what we've all done.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned it briefly. You said that in, making characters in general, you tend to come up with an idea or a personality first. Does that mean you're, I guess, making a character before you're even picking up a rule book?
Yeah.
Do you tend to draw inspiration from other sources other than like fantasy and things like that?
I had for a time when I was when I used to work at a call center, some customers would ring me up and I'd actually steal their personalities. It sounds really odd, but
that's interesting.
They would have because I used to work life insurance, so you would get all sorts of people phoning up. Not always sad, like there'll be some really jolly people because they're just trying to check out their accounts, but you'd just meet a whole host of characters on the phone, and some of them were just like, oh, I can see you in this certain like situation, and I would take whoever they were as a person and then just bring them across into Mad Mage or whatever module was being played. And it's like kind of a cheaty way to do it, but I think it was a very interesting way to make a character as just people that you've met and you're never going to ever meet again. I'm not sure if
you're taking inspiration from life insurance customers.
Yeah, for a time. Yeah.
That's amazing. and fascinating. I mean, like you said, I guess they're going to come, all kinds of different angles at you. So yeah, that's really interesting.
I suppose also like you've got a clever way to do it of just taking someone from a video game. So that's also like a really maybe an easier route to go, which is what I should probably do, because I think taking real life people and putting them in a fantasy setting is probably not ideal.
I mean, you're only seeing them like a brief snapshot of them. It's not really their full personality. Yeah. It's just an inspiration.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned this before. You are widely regarded for making druids. And as you also mentioned, you made your first character in Baldur's Gate 3 a druid. What is it about druids that draws you back to them time after time?
I think it's my own fascination with wanting to transform. Like, the ability just to transform into any creature that you see is the coolest, in my opinion, the coolest thing you can do. Like, do you want to be a rat? Do you want to be like this huge bear? I don't know. And you don't even have to use it for the most cheesed purpose, which is extra health points. It's like just wanting to be another creature. I think it comes back from when I used to read the Animorphs books. Like I thought,
yes,
yeah, that was the coolest thing ever when I was a kid. It's like now I have like characters I can create that actually do that. I don't think I've ever grown up with thinking that way.
I wonder if there's a generation of D&D players out there that all read Animorphs when they went through high school, and now they're all just making druids.
Maybe we need to put a poll out on the socials and find out.
All right, let me ask you something as a player. What makes you happy as a player?
What makes me happy as a player? I think being with people that you know aren't going to judge you in any way. You can be yourself, and the person in the leadership position, where like for D&D, that being the DM, really can help you bloom as a person, as a player, and really make you feel welcomed. I think that's the nicest thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Now, not just as a player, so I know you have a bit of experience running games as well as a GM. Is this something that you want to do more of in the future?
I would love to, actually. I do have some already ongoing games, which I don't think my players intended for me to be such a brutal DM, because I have quite the body count at the table. Some of them because I really don't pull punches. Like, I know some DMs are very nice, and sometimes if they crit, they'll be like, "Oh, it's actually a 19," or "Well, didn't quite crit the character." But for me, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. If I crit, I'm going to take such delight in killing your character. If you don't actively choose to disengage when you should have, or you've done something silly and you shouldn't have been there. It's like, I think I'm running Dungeon of the Mad Mage with some co-workers, and I think I've killed 7 characters already.
Whew.
And we're not even on level 3.
Yikes.
But they find such joy in it, and it's just like that encourages me to actually want to continue DMing as opposed to being a player. It's just really fun.
Yeah, and like you said, they get joy out of it, and I think, you know, as long as they're enjoying themselves, that's the main thing. Well, that kind of, I think you've almost answered my next question. Are you a cruel or kind GM, and why?
I think I'm a cruel GM, but I make sure everyone's okay. So if it's been a particularly brutal session, like someone's character has died, or someone who's not really used to a certain situation is confronted by something, at the end of the night, or even like straight after something has happened, I'd be like, are you okay? We can pause for a second. You can create a new character. Like, do you want to talk about it? And like really just make sure my players are actually having fun. If they're not having fun because of like they have lost a character, and I know I keep talking about like losing characters, but it is a common trope with me. And they're not okay, like we can talk about it, and we can like, if they want to, we can retroactively do something if they change their mind about something that would have avoided their character death, if I'm feeling particularly kind. If I know that they've done something silly and they said, oh, I didn't mean that, I'm like, no. You committed, you took your hand off the piece, we're committing to this, and that's the result of your silliness. But I would say for the most part, I am a cruel DM. I don't know if anyone wants me as their DM knowing that information now.
Well, there's a lot of kindness in there as well.
Yeah. It's kind cruelness.
Kind cruelness. I like it. So I asked you just before what makes you happy as a player. Does this differ from what makes you happy as a GM?
Not really. I think they go hand in hand. Just making sure everyone's having a good time is enough for me. That means I've had a good time.
Here.
Yeah.
Well, that brings us to the next quickfire section. So I'm going to shoot some more quickies at you.
Yeah.
And first thing that comes in your head. All right, are we good?
Okay, I'm good. Yeah.
All right. And go. Favorite movie quote?
I don't know why, but Hasta la Vista Baby came into my head.
Bake or fry?
Bake.
Strength or flight?
Light.
Bug killer or bug savior?
Bug savior.
Shittest Pokemon?
Oh, Weedle.
Weedle. Good answer. Well said. Now that brings us to the final section of the interview, but I have saved the best for last.
Oh,
so
good.
I hope you're ready.
Yes, always.
Now, you have a long and illustrious career playing D&D. What's something that you've never done that you'd like to try?
In D&D? Play a sorcerer. It's really simple,
Okay.
but I've never played a sorcerer before.
Okay. Is there a reason you're not a fan of sorcery, or you've just tended to lean towards other classes like druids in the past?
I think I did try. So I do tell a bit of a lie. I did try and do a sorcerer in like the first year I started playing, but I had such an awful time not really understanding how sorcery points worked. Not really understanding why they do certain things. I think it's all been changed since Tasha's. Like, they've reworked sorcerers a bit. It really scared me off of playing them. The same goes with wizards to a certain effect, but sorcerers for some reason just seem like to be the greatest mystery on how to play them. I would like to give them another go one day, but I do enjoy playing tank classes, like being at the front line. So playing a sorcerer would be quite a different experience to what I'm used to.
Yeah, they are very, I guess, versatile in the way that you can use all your sorcery points. I think there's plenty of options and synergies. So yeah, I can get that, especially for a new player. It could be a bit intimidating for sure.
Yeah, just wondering like, oh, do I take up certain meta magic aspects, and like which one's the best one? I don't know, I would have to read up on them. But yeah, that's one thing I would like to do.
Now, this one was asked by Andrew to me, but I thought it was an excellent question, so I'm going to ask you as well. What is one thing you wish you could change about D&D, and how would you do it?
I really liked your response to what you gave to Andrew. With the fireball, the feet into meters, or was it feet into meters?
Well, that was another question. He asked me if you could change one rule to change the inches to, I think it was miles, or feet to miles. What would it be? All right. What would you do then for that?
Actually, I think as a whole, for that question, I would change how criticals work.
Okay.
Mostly in the sense, and I know it's something that we bring up. I think we've brought up a couple of times on air on the podcast, but how Pathfinder has implemented critical hits, either it being a natural 20 or 10 over the AC, is the most satisfying way to really show that you've overpowered your enemy. And I really think it could flourish in D&D. And I do hope they bring in that ruling in the new set in D&D 1.
Okay, just to clarify, what was the ruling that they used, sorry?
So either you can roll a natural 20, it's a normal way to get your critical hit, or if your final score is 10 above what the characters or the enemy's AC is. So if they have an AC of 17, but you've rolled a 27, not hitting the natural 20, that's a crit because it's 10 over.
Right. That makes sense. And now I see what you mean in terms of overcoming their defenses. Yeah, that makes sense.
Like a true overwhelming power. And I think that warrants to display like a flex that you've done more damage than usual, and you can add those extra dice. I think that's a really cool rule.
Yeah, that's a good point, isn't it? Because I feel like I've only been playing for a few years, but it doesn't seem like there's many things that, mechanically speaking, like one individual who is like dominantly more powerful than someone else that they can do to just end the combat quickly. Like you still have to go through the motions of trying to hit them and then taking away their HP. So that makes sense to me. Yeah,
it's like every fight you come across is, if you know that the fight isn't going to be a particularly challenging one, it just feels like you're just chipping away at a log until it's like fallen over. It doesn't feel like very immersive sometimes. I guess that depends who your GM is. But yeah, I think that would be a nice rule to implement.
Okay. Now, this next one, I want you to go back in time and find the young Jen about to sit down for her first tabletop RPG session. Sounds like it was at Dave's place with Callan, Martin and Rachel. What are you telling her?
Not to worry about what other people are thinking. I think that's the biggest thing that holds me back, even to this day, but I'm growing out of that mindset. It's just like, everyone's there that is your friend, that likes you, and no one's there to judge you. If you want to put on a silly voice, you can. And I think that's really something that held me back for the longest time, for years. It's like, I really would love to do a voice, and Callan was doing voices from day one. And I think the biggest thing is like, just don't worry about what they're thinking. If they laugh, it's probably with you, not at you.
Yeah, 100%. I was very much the same. And I think that's something that I struggled with, certainly in the past, about what people thought. So, yeah.
Yeah, you definitely have opened up quite a bit. When we first met you, we were like very quiet. And then over time, you put on these like fantastical and amazing accents. I'm like, who is this man and how does he do with these voices?
Like the butterfly emerging from the chrysalis, Jen. That's how it is.
It's beautiful.
All right. My last question to you to wrap things up. What advice would you give to new players?
My advice to new players would be It's not going to be philosophical. It's not even advice. It's more like just telling you it won't be the last dice set you ever buy. You're definitely going to buy more. And I think that's probably the strongest bit of telling I can give.
Make room in your drawer because hell, you'll need it.
Absolutely.
Also, buy a tackle box.
Right? What a good idea.
Well, that's all we've got time for, ladies and gentlemen. Jen, thank you for joining me and for answering my questions.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for the really good questions, actually. Really thought-provoking.
All right, folks. Good boy.
Bye.